I think it's a really great question. It's something that we're continuing to really talk about. And from an administrative end, I know they're watching it. And when it comes to masking, we have the new CDC guidelines that have come out to give us new ways of thinking about it and looking at it. It's really going to depend on the context. So if we see a new variant or we see a rise in cases that's really causing a detriment to our sustainability of in-person education, that's something that's going to be a key factor. If we're seeing that we don't have the subs to fill in because we have teachers that are having to be absent because they're sick, then we're not able to provide the education that we're supposed to. Or if we're having kids that are getting sick and they're not coming to school, well, then obviously they're not getting the education they're needing because of the fact that we just have this uptick or we have this variant. And if we don't have masking, potentially this might be a tool to help mitigate any detriment it has to that sustainability. I do think the other thing that we'll always look at is continuing to talk to our local health professionals and the researchers that are doing a lot of work around COVID, as well as the wastewater shed, to see like where case numbers are at. I do think one thing I've been talking with constituents about, as well as talking to staff within the district, is that we now have 2 years of COVID that we've had to deal with it. And we see that there's kind of this natural kind of rise and fall starting in like late October all the way to like mid-February, to where cases begin to rise, and it has various spikes in between, and then it falls down. And so potentially this might be that period that could be similar to what we, look at for being cold or flu season, like it becomes what we know as like COVID season. And it, at least for this third year going into it, depending on where, CDC guidance is at, what we're getting told by our local and state health professionals, we might need to have a conversation with our community about, could we preemptively look at masking as being a tool as we go into November and December and January as a way to sustain education and keeping it in person and not having to have many disruptions. But obviously, like I said, it's all going to be contextual. And, we have a couple, we're in March, so we have a few months. There might be some more new research that comes out that really gives us better guidance on what we need to be doing to ensure that the sustainability of in-person can occur. I got asked this question 2 days ago, and it's hard to answer at times because I'm a little biased, right? I was serving during this time and making responses. What I will say is what I think we did really well was we were reassessing every month. We were meeting, and that was difficult. It wasn't an easy thing to do because then I know it wasn't easy for our community because it kept us on edge on, okay, what's the next response going to be? Are we going to be making a shift? And so, why I think that was so good was that it, at least for our community, they knew we weren't just making a decision and just sticking with that decision. We were constantly reevaluating and looking at it. I know for me, it meant burning the candle at both ends and sometimes in the middle of like staying up until 2 to 3 a.m., constantly digging into research papers that were in pre-publication that were still needing to be peer reviewed, but just were about COVID, looking at old publications in the early like 2000s that were around how masking was used when there was flu outbreaks in schools and how that was a way to help mitigate the spread. And so really just making sure that how I was making decisions, and when I did made a vote, that I knew I was as well informed as I could be, and that I felt confident in the reasons why I was doing the vote that I was doing. I think looking back over the last 2 years, there's a lot of things that I could say that like, yeah, we could have done that a little bit better. One of those being in October of 2020, it was like mid-October when we made the decision, let's try and bring back elementary and fully in person. And, I think we could have potentially made that call sooner, but that's also looking back at that, right? Like in the moment, it felt like we were doing the right thing by waiting until we were a little bit lower in case numbers and then going. But it also, I look at that now, as I said, we see that trend. Okay, so October, like late October is when that kind of started spiking up. That's what we saw in October of 2020. And that's what really made it elementary only be 2 weeks of full in person, because late October hit and then we had a switch back because of that. And so it's all kind of, I think at this point, for those that are on the board and after April 5th, that future board, I think really looking at this, they have a lot of good data to make some really good decisions comparably. And they're not having to be reactive. They can be more proactive in that response. And so I'm hopeful that our community and the board will be able to kind of have good dialogue on how we prepare for what this coming academic year will look like during the winter season in response to COVID. And instead of it being that, all right, we're making this decision, boom, we all know that this is potentially going to be the decision that's made depending on what the context ends up looking like. But yeah, I do. And part of why I support the bond is that we're having a lot of growth here in Columbia. That growth has not stopped. It just keeps on happening, which is great. It means people are coming here for a variety of reasons, and they're staying and they're wanting to raise their families. And so that means that we're, as a whole, we as a community are an inviting place, and people are wanting to stay. At the same time, that means their kids are growing up here and their kids are going to school here. And so to address any overcrowding that we're having in our buildings means that we need to build more buildings. And a lot of that happens more at the K-5 level. And really the bond is looking at a 4-year time period for this, 2 issuances, the first issuance being 40 million. And then in 2024, another issuance of another 40 million. And all of that is to help build an elementary school on the John Warner site, because that John Warner Middle School, we also purchased a little bit more land than what we needed for the middle school for that purpose of potentially building another elementary school. And then building a second elementary school, whether that's a remodeling of one or it's a brand new one being built, is more of, that's a question mark, but that's really in response to what does this growth look like. The other piece of it is the Career Center. I'm really excited for what that means. The Career Center hasn't been updated, the physical structure of it 50 or 70 years ago. And so it's been some time, and our programming has kept up to speed with everything. We have our students are doing really great work. The building just doesn't look like you would see those type of courses with technology and cybersecurity and all of these things like are going on in there that are so cool and up to date. But how do we get our community to see that? And so we've been working with our new architecture firm that we hired back in the fall, DLR Group, and I went and visited a career center near Kansas City. And it's amazing. It's an open space. It gives a lot of space for the community to come in, see what students are doing, be able, without disturbing what's going on, right? Being able to see like how students are working in the shops, what are they doing on their computers? They're creating this great work. And then the other thing that we've been having is they've been having some stakeholder conversations, just preemptively, understanding that like the bond hasn't been approved, but if it does get approved, what are some things that people would like to see in a new career center? Or a remodeling of the Career Center, really. And one of those things being what we kind of thought was some storefront kind of way of looking at it, so that our students in the culinary classes could sell their food. Those that are growing plants and things can sell those flowers. And then those that are in our like the marketing classes, they can create that marketing material and like post it on social media, have it outside on those storefront buildings. And then members of our community can come and engage and see. And this being more of just not just a career center for our students to be a part of, but really becoming this kind of communal space where our community can come to. I look at it as like almost like a smaller farmers market, right? Like having a farmers market that was built on the west side of town, and just that being a communal space where so many community members go to, and that the Career Center could become a second communal location space where folks can come to, and it being really deeply student centered and giving our students and seeing how folks really are wanting to, the products that they create, they're wanting to. And I mean, it's a really exciting venture that the bond would allow us to do. And I do want to address where some concerns are at with folks that are not supportive of the bond. A lot of the things that are being said is around how FTE and positions have been allocated across the district, and bond money can't be utilized for that. And I think a lot of those that are critiquing us know that, but I think for some that might not know, it's good to point that out. So due to the bond language not being able to utilize for that and go into the operating fund, how it's funded is through our local tax levy and through the state funding that we receive. And the district does an extensive kind of way of how we allocate new positions. Each building submits a proposal for what they're needing and everything like that. And then the district looks at where all these proposals are at, what are our financial situation, and where do we see the most need in all of our buildings. We're a large district, so it's not just it seems very simple at times, and yes, there are needs, and that in no way am I saying that those needs do not exist. It's more of we're a district with many buildings that have a lot of needs, some with massively different needs, and others that have some of the needs that we normally would think in a school building. And so it's really difficult to kind of talk about both, because the tax levy is how we address that issue, where bond money can't be done in that way. But it is a no tax increase bond, so we're not going to see any increases there as a community. And what it will do is it really will allow us to address our continued growth and also offer this opportunity for students within career and technical education, which is really important. I'm really supportive of it. This has been a long time coming for the district. The last 3 years, I've approved increases to our salary rates, and part of it has been trying to get to this goal of the base being 40,000. And what we do really great as a district is that we're not just increasing the base every time we increase salaries, we're increasing everyone's salary at that same rate. And so everyone still gets their step increase, while at the same time seeing if anytime we give an increase to the base, there's that increase to their pay as well. The other thing that we do is we're not just increasing our salaried employees either. Every time we've done a pay increase over the last 3 years, we've also been increasing our hourly rate for positions. And it all varies depending on what the certifications are or the different levels of expertise that are held in those specific hourly positions. But I mean, all of that has been done. And so we've been working really hard to ensure that we're not just giving new money or raises just to one group of folks. So it is being given to the majority of our staff, because it's not, our teachers do wonderful work with our kids, but to make our mission possible and to make education as successful as it is in Columbia Public Schools, it takes everybody else. It takes our bus drivers, our nutrition services staff, it takes our janitorial staff, it takes our security and everybody to make that possible. And so that's why it's so important that we're showing that value, in the sense that this isn't just our salary position, it is our hourly. So I'm very excited for it. I also think what's great about this contract, this go around, if it does get approved, is that it's a 2-year contract. And so it does offer a little bit more stability for the district and for our teachers to know that, like, all right, this is what this contract will be. And it gives us as a district a little bit more continuity of not every year having to think, okay, is this contract going to be largely different than what we've had in the past. And so it does give us a little, I think, some stronger space, and it does allow us to have, I think, more meaningful conversations with the union over a 2-year period to prepare for when we have a larger bargaining session around the contract, because it gives us that ability to, if there was an idea that we were like, it's a great idea, but we can't implement it right now. We need to first kind of prepare for what that might look like to then pilot it. Well, that could take 2 years, and that gives us that space to really try that. So. I think we are. I think our teachers are the professional educators that our kids are needing to really talk about this and have these larger conversations. I think it's really hard. I was talking yesterday at the Boone County Retired Teachers monthly meeting, and I shared, when we're talking about history, and a great and awful example right now is with what's happening over in Europe with the Ukraine-Russian conflict, right? There are facts about what's going on over there. And there are those that but there's two larger perspectives that are happening and talking about those facts. You have those that are more pro-Russian, you have those that are really pro-Ukrainian. And so when we look at history, not as it's unfolding in this moment, but we look at history in the past, right? There are facts, and those are more objective, but then the various perspectives on those facts are going to be subjective and different. And so it's really important for our kids to know that and to hear these varying narratives of the same events, because it allows them to understand not only is the human experience isn't monolith, and it allows them to see that when you're talking with people, when you're working with people, when you're engaging with folks in your community, you're all going to be having these varied lived experiences that are going to at times have a larger experience that we all had. With COVID, we've all experienced COVID, but all of our experiences vary in how we were able to do that. And I think we all understand that as human beings and as individuals, but when we're talking about history, it's so important to also show our kids that, because they're young. And so sometimes that's not always in the brain of like, oh, that is like that cognitive learning of there being a variety of differences. And especially when we have these heavier topics, right? Topics that don't make the history of our nation or the history of our state look always the best. And it's important to have that. And that comes at, for why I think it's important is I grew up in Alabama. So the majority of our field trips were social study field trips. We went to the Edmund Pettus Bridge. We went to Tuskegee University multiple times because only like 45 minutes away. I mean, and we talked about the Tuskegee Airmen. We talked about the Tuskegee Project. We, you know, all of these things that like goods and bads, right? We also went to Atlanta and visited the MLK Jr. Museum and went over to the church over there that he preached at. I mean, like these sites that mean so much and have scarred and also good history, right? It's these things that, especially with current legislation here in our state, I fear with the kind of the definition of divisive or controversial material, it's like, would my field trips as a kid, would that be seen as controversial topics, right? Would talking about Bloody Sunday at Edmund Pettus Bridge be controversial? And like, and when I talk about these field trips, I'm not meaning we were junior high or anything. We're talking 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. Like these were those grade ranges that I was visiting these locations and we were learning about this. And, you know, here in Missouri, we don't have as many of those type of sites like we had in Alabama. And so it is more of how do we talk about it? How do we get this information to our kids? So I do think that we're doing a good job. I do have some concerns with where the state conversation and the national conversation is at, just because I feel like it's saying that we're going to be limiting these experiences that might seem controversial and not have our kids learn about it, which it does a variety of things, but 2 of them being that it says this is a piece of our history or information that we're going to keep away from you. And I don't think that any governmental entity should be the one saying we're going to keep this away from you. Well, at the same time, we're saying that anyone who has an affiliated identity or some type of historical connection to that experience that we are saying we're not going to allow you to have access to, we're then saying that narrative doesn't matter. And that's not okay, because then we're saying that these pieces of who you are as an individual don't matter. And I don't think that's what anyone should be wanting to do, nor should here in CPS, that is not the ethos of our district in any way. And so I do think that we're doing a good job. And I know I added more into answering your question than what's there, but I do think that's, you know, I think that's a part of the question, right? Because that's this larger conversation. And I think folks in our community would like to know where folks' ideas land on where those current bills are at. Folks will talk about transparency and communication, and talking with constituents. I always ask them, okay, define it for me. What do you mean by like transparency and communication? And a lot of times what gets said is like, well, all right, like telling us that like why you made a decision that you made. And I said, okay, our conversations as a board are recorded, they're published, they're up there, it's recorded live majority of the time. And we're not required to do that, right? Like recording of board meetings is not a state statute. It is something that CPS does to be transparent. And they go, well, we want more. And so I'll ask, okay, well, do you want that communication of almost like Supreme Court decisions? Like why? Like not pro-choice, that's not the right way, but the dissenting opinion and like the prevailing opinion, and like one board member writing it and they're like, well, no, that's too much. And I go, okay, well, I have not pinpointed it when talking with folks, what exactly they're wanting to see beyond what we do. Because any time that I bring up something, and obviously this isn't for everybody, but just this is a very general brush of when these conversations happen. Anything that I add on that isn't what they were thinking, just like the example that I just shared, they go, well, no, I don't mean it that way. And so it's just really hard to pinpoint. And I think that it makes sense. These words of transparency and communication are very broad. And the lines of how that all operates is very different in a district this size. And so I think when it comes to the board itself and how we've been operating for the last 3 years since I've been on it, we've made some changes in the way that we try to communicate. It used to be that just the board vice president did the responding for the board. In communications, when we receive an email, the board vice president would be the one that would say, thank you for sending this email to us. We appreciate it. We'll direct your question to the superintendent, or if it was more of like, why, the board did this, like what policy is like aligns. If it's something that can be very answered from a board perspective, like we give that answer. We've recently, recognizing, especially after the 2020-2021 academic year, that was a huge burden. Susan Blackburn at the time, who's not on the board anymore, she was the VP at that time. And so really we changed our way of doing communication, where every month we're rotating the board member that's doing the responding for the board. So this way everyone is getting contact with a different board member at different times, as well as that we're not burning just one person out on trying to make sure that this communication is happening in that way. When it comes to transparency, I know that there are concerns around that things get talked about before, but a lot of times that's not happening at all. If there is a conversation that happened before, it is more from a legal standpoint, because our lawyers were giving us like what legal ramifications would be, which is all allowed under the state, right? And so all the conversations happen there. Now we have board members who aren't super vocal, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with them like only adding in on a conversation on a short basis. We're all different individuals, and we all have a different variety of ways how we process and exchange information with each other during those, like in those meetings, and how it's conveyed to the public. And so I feel that we've been doing a good job. I think we give access to our board meetings in a multitude of ways that are not done in any other districts. We have one of the most expansive ways of communicating with the board in a variety of mediums. And so I do think we do a good job overall when it comes to a systems approach of giving access and transparency. Now, I do think that there are parents who are frustrated at times because they're wanting a very specific answer, or they're wanting an answer that isn't the answer they got, right? And I think there are times where I am faulty of this too. I was in a meeting with someone and I said, but you're not giving me an answer to my question. And they said, no, I have, it's just not the answer you want. And I, leaving that meeting going, okay, you're right. Like you gave me an answer. I just don't like the way that you justified your answer. And I was saying that wasn't an answer. And so I do think that there needs to be a little bit of understanding of the fact that at times we are answering. It's just, it's not the answer you're wanting. And so we're not as quickly as accepting it, because we're human beings and we're all fallible in that regard. And so when it comes, short answer, yes, I think we're doing a well job. I think there are ways that we can do things better. But that long answer, I think just hopefully gives context to our community, and kind of with these questions of transparency and communication, and what can be done to adjust this. And we are looking at ways of making sure that emails are getting to correct staff members and everything. Dr. Yearwood's in his first year. He comes from a district that had a system that they purchased that helped like funnel kind of these things out, but he really wanted to assess how we were doing it first for a year before really trying to introduce something new, and really wanting to see like, what is it that we need to do to kind of address this concern that's within our community. So it's not something that the board and the administration is pushing away. It is something that we are trying to actively go, okay, we hear what these concerns are. How can we address? We're in a situation to where we've had a lot of change over the last 2 years. We've had to pivot and shift due to COVID. We've brought in a new superintendent. Almost half of our central office administrative team that's in the cabinet are either new in their positions or interims in their positions. We have new building leaders. And so all of this change around that leadership space during this time that's been very shaky has opened up a lot of opportunities, but at the same time makes us a little bit vulnerable as a district, right? We are in a position to where we are needing to address major issues, these things around academics, around having a healthy work environment so that we can attract and retain staff, and that folks are happy here in the district. And so in addition to all of that, we also have a very young board. And what I mean by that as a school board is right before I joined in April of 2019, there is about, it was either 48 years of collective board service. So a lot of continuity and history and institutional knowledge of the district was on that board. Now we are a board of 23 years of collective board service, with 11 of those held by our President Wade. And so the rest of it, all of us are in our first term. And so if I am reelected, it means I will be the second senior most member of the board, with only 3 years under my belt. And so I hope folks can see kind of what that means, right? Like we have a lot of massive opportunity here with new voices and new perspectives, while at the same time, if we don't have that continuity of leadership and that institutional and historical knowledge being present, we might be spinning our wheels when trying to address these major issues in ways that we already had, but no one knows that we had as a board. And so we're not really quickly moving forward in the way that we need to. And so that's why I think is really important around what I'm trying to offer to the community within my reelection is the fact that I want to return because we have some major needs. We have some major opportunities to hang on to and grab and really grow this district in a good direction. And I want to help us get there. We have a lot of new perspectives on the board. This community is going to be able to, if you vote for me, you get a second vote as well to bring in a new person to the team to have this conversation. And so there's still going to be another new perspective there to work with and to help train them and get them to know how to operate as a board member really in the position so that they can even be a stronger asset to the team as we are moving forward as a district. Well, at the same time, really wanting to provide that guidance of like, here's where we were at and what we were doing to those that are on the board now, like, and here's where we're at now. Like, this is where we are, and this is what we're trying to do. We're going to be creating a new 5-year plan as mandated by the state for every school district. And so that's going to be hugely important because that's going to give us a vision and a mission for the next 5 years. And knowing that historical knowledge is going to be imperative, that we're not just repeating something, or we're not making it a vision or a mission that it's like, oh, we can easily attain that, done in the first year, don't have to worry about it ever again. Like because that doesn't push us to grow. And so I think that's really important for a community to know, and just in that regard of like why I'm rerunning and what are those kind of major concerns that I'm seeing that have pushed me to do this reelection here, because it has been a really difficult 3 years. It wasn't, I ran before COVID was a thing. It was 8 months into the first year when we had to begin responding to it. So it's not that it's been an easy first term in any capacity. So